She stood on that train platform for 6 hours in a wedding dress, clutching a telegram that said just 11 words. Changed my mind. Do not come. No money. No family. No way home. When she walked into that saloon looking for work, she had no idea the man who would save her was hiding a secret darker than her own. A secret about his dead wife. A secret that a powerful man was using to destroy him. But here is the twist nobody saw coming. The woman who fell from that cliff, she was not the villain everyone believed her to be. She was a victim, and the truth she left behind would change everything. This is a story about two broken people who found each other in the most unexpected place. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will take your breath away. This story reminds us that our past does not define our future. That guilt we carry for things we could not control does not have to be our prison. And that family is not about blood. It is about the people who choose to stay when everyone else walks away. Sometimes the darkest moments of our lives lead us exactly where we are meant to be. Clara lost everything. But in losing everything, she found a home she never knew she was searching for. This is proof that second chances exist for those brave enough to reach for them. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances and the healing power of love, drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from today. I want to see how far Clara's journey reaches across the world. Hit that like button if you stayed until the end. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to start over. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary love, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one. The telegram in her gloved hand had gone soft with sweat and repeated reading. 11 words that had shattered the future she crossed half a continent to claim. Changed my mind. Do not come. Letter follows. S.H. No explanation, no apology. Just 11 words from Silas Hartley, the man who had written her such beautiful letters about Montana sunsets and mountain air, and a life they would build together. Clara was 28 years old. She had been a school teacher in Boston for 8 years before scandal touched her family, and doors began closing one by one. Silas had seemed like salvation, his letters arriving like lifelines thrown to a drowning woman. Now she understood. There was no salvation, only different kinds of drowning. The station master had stopped asking if she needed help around hour 3. The handful of people who passed through the station gave her looks that ranged from pity to suspicion. A woman alone in a wedding dress with no groom in sight. In their eyes, she could see the assumptions forming like storm clouds. Fallen woman, ruined reputation, questionable circumstances. Clara touched the small knife hidden in the sleeve of her dress, a habit from Boston streets where a woman alone learned quickly that the world offered no protection. Her father had taught her to shoot before his business failed, and his debts consumed everything. Her mother had taught her to sew the knife into her sleeve before consumption took her the following spring. They were both dead now, her parents, her younger brother Tommy. Everyone who had ever loved her was gone, and the last man who claimed he wanted her had just sent 11 words to explain that he did not want her after all. The sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that might have been beautiful if Clara had any beauty left in her heart to appreciate. She picked up her single carpet bag, everything she owned in the world, and walked toward the main street of Copper Hollow. The boarding house was her first stop. Mrs. Harlow answered the door with a pleasant expression that curdled the moment she took in Clara's appearance. Wedding dress, no ring, no husband, no explanation that would satisfy small-town morality. No rooms for women of questionable circumstances, Mrs. Harlow said, and closed the door before Clara could respond. The hotel clerk quoted prices she could not afford. The general store owner shook his head without meeting her eyes. The church was locked. a handwritten sign indicating the pastor was visiting congregations north and would not return for a week. By the time full darkness fell, Clara had walked every street of Copper Hollow twice, her feet blistered in shoes never meant for unpaved roads. Her wedding dress had gone from ivory to gray, with dust and despair. $17. That was all she had in the world, enough for perhaps 3 meals and nowhere to sleep. The Golden Spur Saloon was the only building still blazing with light as the town settled into darkness. Through the dusty windows, Clara could see men gathered around tables, glasses catching lamplight, smoke curling toward rafters. Everything her Boston upbringing told her to avoid. But Boston did not matter anymore. Her upbringing had been funded by her father's schemes, and those debts had consumed everything. The respectable world had closed its doors. All that remained was survival. Clara pushed open the saloon door. The room went silent, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had physically cut every voice. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward the doorway where Clara stood in her ruined wedding dress, dust-stained silk catching lamplight, dark hair falling from its pins. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman with nowhere else to go. "Well now," a voice drawled from behind the bar, "what have we here?" The speaker was a man in his 40s, well-dressed by frontier standards, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that assessed Clara like merchandise. He moved from behind the bar with practiced grace. "I'm looking for work," Clara said, forcing her voice steady. "I was told you might need a piano player." The man's smile did not reach his eyes. "I am Burke. I own this establishment." "And you are?" "Clara Brennan. I am a school teacher from Boston. I can play piano and I can read music." "A school teacher." Burke circled her slowly, close enough that she could smell pomade and whiskey. "In a wedding dress, walking into my saloon alone." "That is quite a story already, Miss Brennan. My circumstances are my own affair." "We do need a piano player," Burke said smoothly. "Previous one caught the fever. Terrible shame. Why do you not show us what you can do?" Clara moved toward the battered piano in the corner, grateful for something to do with her hands. She sat on the scarred bench and began to play. Mozart. Something beautiful and complex. She poured everything into it. All her anger at Silas, all her grief for her lost future, all her terror at being alone in a place that saw her as prey. When she finished, the silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Burke appeared beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder that felt like ownership. "That was exceptional, Miss Brennan. I think we can come to an arrangement. Piano playing from 7 until closing. $1 a night, plus room and board upstairs." Clara felt the trap closing even as she heard the words. But what choice did she have? "That is all?" she asked carefully. "Just piano playing?" "Just piano playing," Burke confirmed with a smile that said otherwise. Before Clara could respond, one of the men at a nearby table stood up. He was massive, over 6 feet tall, with a thick beard and bloodshot eyes. He had been staring at Clara since she walked in, and now he moved toward her with the confidence of a man who expected to get what he wanted. "The piano can wait," the man said. "I want to buy you a drink first." "I do not drink while I am working," Clara said. The man grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "I said, I am buying you a drink." Clara moved without thinking. The knife from her sleeve slipped into her hand and she slashed across his palm, drawing blood. The man howled and released her, staring at his wounded hand in shock. But Burke had 3 other men, and they were already moving toward her, cutting off any escape. Clara backed against the piano, knife raised, knowing she could not fight them all. The saloon door swung open. The man who entered was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair, and a face weathered by years of outdoor work. He wore practical ranch clothes, dusty and worn, and his expression was absolutely neutral as he surveyed the scene. No anger, no surprise, just quiet assessment. Behind him, partially hidden by his legs, stood 2 small boys. Identical twins, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair and eyes that seemed too large for their pale faces. She stabbed you? The man said to the bleeding drunk. His voice was deep and quiet, the kind that did not need volume to carry weight. Reckon you deserved it. This is not your concern, Stone, Burke said sharply. I am making it my concern. The man called Stone let his hand drift toward the gun at his hip. The gesture was casual, almost lazy. But suddenly the three men who had been advancing on Clara stopped moving. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension stretched like wire about to snap. Then one of the twins, the smaller one, stepped out from behind his father's legs. He was staring at Clara with an intensity that seemed wrong for a child so young. He had not blinked since he first saw her. Stone noticed. Something in his expression shifted, cracked, showed a flash of something that might have been hope or might have been fear. You know how to teach children? He asked Clara without taking his eyes off Burke's men. I am a school teacher, Clara said. Stone finally looked at her directly. My boys have not smiled in 3 years, have not spoken in nearly as long. He nodded toward the twins, still staring at Clara. That is the first time he has looked at anyone like that since his mother died. The words hung in the smoky air. Clara looked at the two small boys, at their pale faces and their two large eyes, and she saw something she recognized. The look of children who had lost too much, too young. The look she saw in her own mirror every day. I do not need a wife, Stone continued. I need someone to bring my boys back to life. Can you do that? Clara thought about the boarding house door closing in her face. The telegram crumpled in her pocket. The trap Burke was setting with his $1 a night and his room upstairs. She thought about her brother Tommy, dead because she had not been watching. Dead because she had told him to wait while she finished her book. She looked at the two silent boys and made a choice. I will try, she said. Stone nodded once, then turned to Burke. How much does she owe you? She owes me nothing, Burke said, his smile gone cold. She walked in here of her own free will. Stone pulled bills from his pocket and dropped them on the bar. For any inconvenience, then. The lady is leaving with me. Clara grabbed her carpet bag and walked toward the door, heart hammering. As she passed Stone, she felt him fall into step beside her, a wall of solid presence between her and the men who watched them go. Outside, a wagon waited in the street. Stone helped Clara onto the bench seat, then lifted both boys into the back. As he climbed up and took the reins, Burke appeared in the saloon doorway. Victor will not be pleased, Stone, Burke called out. She is his merchandise. Stone did not respond, but Clara saw his knuckles go white on the leather reins. The wagon pulled away into darkness, leaving Copper Hollow behind. Clara sat beside this stranger who had just purchased her freedom, heading toward an unknown destination with two silent children watching her from the wagon bed. Who is Victor? She asked quietly. And what did he mean? Merchandise? Stone was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. Victor Crane owns most of this territory, and he thinks he owns most of the people in it too. But not you? Stone's jaw tightened. Not anymore. Not ever again. They rode in silence after that, the wagon creaking over rough ground, coyotes howling in the distant hills. One of the twins, the one who had stared at Clara in the saloon, crawled forward and slipped his small hand into hers. He did not speak. He did not smile. But he held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to wash him away. Clara held on too. She did not know what she was riding toward. She did not know if she was trading one trap for another. But for the first time since she received that telegram, she felt something that was not quite hope, but might grow into it. The wagon carried them north, toward the mountains, toward Stone Creek Ranch, toward a future none of them could have predicted. And in the darkness behind them, in the saloon that still blazed with light, Burke was already composing a message for Victor Crane. The journey took 2 hours through darkness so complete that Clara could barely see her own hands. Stone drove without speaking, his attention split between the rough road ahead and the shadows that seemed to press in from all sides. Clara learned his full name from the old man who greeted them when the wagon finally rolled to a stop. Caleb Stone, though everyone called him Cal. The old man was Jedediah Murphy, Jed for short, and he had worked at Stone Creek Ranch for 25 years. "Lord have mercy," Jed said when he saw Clara climb down from the wagon. "Cal, you brought home a woman in a wedding dress. What in the name of all that is holy happened in town?" "Long story," Cal said. "She is here to teach the boys. Nothing more." Jed's weathered face shifted through several expressions before settling on cautious hope. He looked at Clara with eyes that had seen too much to believe in miracles, but wanted to believe anyway. "Miss," he said, tipping his hat, "welcome to Stone Creek. I hope you know what you are getting yourself into." Clara looked around at the ranch in the moonlight. It was large but clearly neglected, the kind of place that had once been prosperous but had been surviving rather than thriving for years. A main house, a barn, several outbuildings, mountains rising dark and massive in the distance. The boys had fallen asleep in the wagon bed, curled together like puppies, seeking warmth. Cal lifted them both, one in each arm, with the practiced ease of a father who had done this many times before. "Jed, show her to the room next to the boys." He paused at the door, not looking back. "Do not go in my room. Do not ask about my wife. Do not go past the western creek, and never let the boys near the northern cliff." "Why the cliff?" Clara asked. "Because that is where their mother died." He disappeared into the house before she could respond. Jed led Clara inside, through a kitchen that had not seen a woman's touch in years, up a narrow staircase to a small room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the valley below. "It is not much," Jed said apologetically. "It is perfect," Clara said, and meant it. After 6 hours on a train platform and 3 hours being turned away from every respectable establishment in Copper Hollow, a bed and 4 walls felt like luxury. "The boys," Jed said, hesitating at the door. "Eli and Noah. Eli is the older one by about 3 minutes. He can talk, just chooses not to. Noah has not made a sound since his mama died. Not a single word in 3 years." "What happened to their mother?" Jed's face closed off. "That is not my story to tell. Cal will share when he is ready. If he is ever ready." After Jed left, Clara sat on the narrow bed and tried to make sense of the day. This morning she had been on a train, heart full of nervous hope about meeting Silas Hartley. Now she was in a stranger's house, employed to somehow bring 2 traumatized children back to life. She unpacked her carpet bag. 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's Bible that she no longer opened, a photograph of her parents before everything fell apart, $17 in carefully folded bills, and a letter she had kept for 5 years, the last letter Tommy ever wrote her in his 7-year-old handwriting. "Dear Sissy, when you come home, can we play together? I miss you. Love, Tommy." She had been away at teaching college when he wrote it. By the time she came home for Christmas, he was dead. Trampled by a carriage because she had told him to wait while she finished unpacking. "Just wait, Tommy. I will play with you in a minute." That minute never came. Clara put the letter back in her bag and tried to sleep. Instead, she lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Wind against the windows, the creak of old wood settling, and somewhere nearby, the sound of a child crying. She was on her feet before she fully registered what she was doing. The sound came from the room next door. She opened the door without knocking and found Noah thrashing in his bed, mouth open in a silent scream, tears streaming down his face. Clara moved to him instinctively, gathering him into her arms the way she used to hold Tommy during thunderstorms. She began to sing, soft and low, a lullaby her mother had sung to her before consumption stole her voice forever. "Hush, little baby, do not say a word. Mama is going to buy you a mockingbird." Noah's thrashing slowed. His silent screams faded. He clung to Clara with desperate strength, his small body shaking against hers. From the other bed, Eli watched with wide eyes. He did not speak, but Clara saw something shift in his expression. A crack in the wall he had built around himself. She kept singing until both boys were calm. Noah's grip eventually loosened as sleep claimed him again. Clara laid him gently back on his pillow and smoothed the hair from his forehead. When she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Cal. He stood in the doorway, silent as a shadow, watching her with an expression she could not read. In the darkness, she could see the hard lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung loose at his sides, like he did not know what to do with them. He spoke, Cal said quietly. Eli, I mean. A few months after Lily died. Just one sentence. Then nothing for 3 years. Clara waited, sensing there was more. He said, I wish you would just go away. Cal's voice was barely audible. He was talking to his mother. She died that same night. He has not spoken since, because he thinks his words killed her. The weight of that settled over Clara like a physical thing. She understood that kind of guilt. She lived with it every day. Words do not kill people, she said. Cal's eyes met hers in the darkness. Then, what does? He walked away before she could answer. Clara returned to her room but did not sleep. Instead, she watched through her window as Cal crossed the yard in the moonlight and climbed the trail toward the northern cliff. He stood there for an hour, maybe more, just staring down at whatever lay below. A man haunted by something he could not escape, just like her. When dawn finally broke over the mountains, Clara rose and went to the kitchen. She had always found comfort in cooking, in the simple act of creating something nourishing from basic ingredients. The kitchen was poorly stocked, but she found enough to work with. Flour, eggs, a bit of salt pork. By the time the sun had fully risen, the house smelled like fresh bread and frying bacon. Jed appeared first, his weathered face breaking into something that might have been wonder. Lord, Miss Boston, I forgot what a real kitchen smelled like. Then Cal, stopping in the doorway when he saw the table set with actual plates instead of the tin dishes he had been using. He said nothing, but he sat down and ate everything she put in front of him. The boys came last, drawn by the smell of food. They sat close together, Eli watching Clara with wary curiosity, Noah watching her with that same intense stare from the saloon. Clara placed plates in front of them and sat down herself. She did not force conversation. She did not ask questions. She simply ate, letting the silence stretch naturally. After breakfast, she took the boys outside. The morning was cool and clear, the sky a blue so pure it almost hurt to look at. Mountains rose in every direction, beautiful and indifferent. I am going to teach you, Clara said to the boys. Not just reading and writing, though we will do that too. I'm going to teach you how to be brave again. Eli's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Noah just stared. Clara found a stick and began to draw letters in the dirt. E-L-I-N-O-H. These are your names, she said. The first thing you are going to learn is how to write who you are. She handed the stick to Eli. He looked at it, looked at her, then looked at his brother. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind only twins understood. Then Eli took the stick and began to copy the letters. They worked until mid-morning, until Eli could write his full name and Noah could trace the letters she had drawn. It was not much, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, Clara explored the house while the boys napped. She was cleaning the kitchen, trying to bring some order to years of neglect, when she found a letter that had fallen behind a cabinet. The handwriting was feminine, elegant. The paper was old, but the words were clear. He knows, Cal. Victor knows everything. I cannot live like this anymore. I am sorry for all of it. L. Clara read it twice, then 3 times. She thought about hiding it, about pretending she had never found it. But something told her this letter was important. This letter was a key to understanding what had happened in this house to these boys, to the man who stood on cliffs at midnight staring down at ghosts. She tucked the letter into her dress pocket and continued cleaning. That evening after supper, Clara sat with the boys on the porch. The sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful in a way that felt almost aggressive after the gray streets of Boston. Noah had his drawing paper, the only thing Cal said he did willingly anymore. Clara watched him work. his small hand moving across the page with intense concentration. When he finished, he held up the paper for her to see. It was a woman, falling, her white dress billowing around her like wings that could not save her. Clara's breath caught. She looked at Noah, at his dark eyes that held too much knowledge for a 7-year-old, and she understood something terrible. He had seen it. He had watched his mother fall from the northern cliff. She did not ask questions. She did not react with horror or pity. She simply took out her own paper and began to draw. A child, alone, crying. Noah watched her draw. When she finished, he reached out and touched the paper, his small finger tracing the tears on the drawn child's face. It was communication. Silent, but real. That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she saw Cal through her window again. He was walking toward the cliff, shoulders hunched against the cold mountain wind. But this time he stopped halfway. He turned and looked back at the house, at the window where Clara stood watching. For a moment, across the darkness, their eyes met. Then he turned and walked back to the house, leaving the cliff behind for the first time in what might have been years. Something had shifted. Clara did not know what it was yet, did not understand the shape of the story she had walked into, but she knew one thing for certain. These broken people, this broken place, felt more like home than anywhere she had been since Tommy died, and that terrified her more than anything else. A week passed at Stone Creek Ranch, and Clara learned the rhythms of this strange new life. She woke before dawn to cook breakfast. She spent mornings teaching the boys their letters and numbers, using sticks in the dirt, using stones for counting, using every method she could devise to reach 2 children locked inside walls of silence and grief. Afternoons she spent cleaning, organizing, trying to restore some sense of order to a house that had been surviving on the bare minimum of care for 3 years. Evenings she sat with the boys while they drew or wrote, small candles of progress in the darkness of their trauma. Cal watched from a distance. He worked the ranch during the day, repairing fences and tending cattle and doing the 1,000 tasks required to keep a place like Stone Creek functioning. But he always seemed to know where Clara and the boys were. Always seemed to appear at exactly the right moment, as if some invisible thread connected him to his sons. Jed watched too, with increasing hope in his weathered eyes. Every small breakthrough, every moment of connection between Clara and the boys seemed to lighten something in the old man's spirit. On the 8th day, Eli spoke. Clara had taken the boys to the creek, a wide, shallow stretch of water within the safe boundaries Cal had established. The morning was warm for autumn, the sun sparkling on the water like scattered diamonds. Noah was drawing in the mud with a stick, his usual intense concentration fixed on whatever image was forming under his hand. Eli was collecting stones, arranging them in patterns only he understood. Clara sat on a flat rock nearby, watching them both, thinking about how different they were despite being identical. Eli, the older by 3 minutes, who could speak but chose silence. Noah, who had not made a sound since the night his mother died. Both of them broken. Both of them healing so slowly it was almost invisible. A fish jumped in the creek, startling Eli. He stumbled backward, foot catching on a root, and tumbled toward the deeper water at the creek's edge. Clara was moving before she consciously decided to act. She plunged into the water, grabbed Eli around the waist, and hauled him back to solid ground. The water was only knee-deep, no real danger, but her heart was pounding as if she had just saved him from drowning. "Are you all right?" she gasped, checking him for injury. And Eli spoke. "You saved me." His voice was rusty from disuse, barely above a whisper, but the words were clear. Clara froze, afraid that any reaction would break whatever spell had loosened his tongue. "Of course I did," she said carefully. "That is what people do." Eli stared at her with those 2 old eyes. Mama did not save herself. No, she did not. Why? I do not know, Eli. I do not know. But her not saving herself had nothing to do with you, nothing to do with anything you said or did. I told her I wished she would go away. The words hung between them, heavy with 3 years of guilt. Clara thought about Tommy. about the last words she had said to him. "Just wait. I will play with you in a minute." "I lost my brother," she said quietly. "He died because I was not watching him. I have spent 5 years believing it was my fault." Was it? No. Clara was surprised to hear herself say it, more surprised to realize she meant it. It was an accident, terrible and unfair, but not my fault. And your mother's death was not your fault either. Eli's lower lip trembled. "But I said those words. I said I wished she would go away." "Words do not kill people, Eli." She had said the same thing to Cal that first night. Saying it again to his son, she finally understood what it meant. "If words could kill, I would have died from all the terrible things I have said to myself." Noah had stopped drawing. He was watching them with that intense stare, his small body absolutely still. Clara held out her hand to him. "Come here." He came. He tucked himself against her side, his small hand gripping her dress like he was afraid she might disappear. "We are all carrying things," Clara said to both of them. "Heavy things, sad things. But we do not have to carry them alone. That is what family means." "Are you our family?" Eli whispered. "I would like to be, if you will let me." The boys looked at each other, that silent twin communication passing between them. Then Noah nodded once, and Eli wrapped his arms around Clara's waist. She held them both, these broken children who were somehow mending something broken in her. That was how Cal found them 20 minutes later. He had been repairing a fence section in the far pasture when some instinct told him to check on his boys. He rode hard, pushed by a fear he could not name, and arrived at the creek to find Clara sitting on the bank with both twins in her arms. "What happened?" he demanded, dismounting before his horse fully stopped. "Eli fell," Clara said calmly. "He is fine. We are all fine." Cal's eyes scanned both boys, checking for injury. Then they returned to Clara, and she saw something in them she had not seen before. Not fear, not suspicion, something softer. "He spoke," Cal said. "Eli. I heard him speaking when I rode up." "Yes. What did he say?" "He asked if I was family." Cal went very still. The word family seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He looked at his sons, at their arms wrapped around Clara, at the way they clung to her like she was solid ground in a world of quicksand. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would like to be, if they let me." For a long moment, Cal said nothing. The creek murmured beside them, oblivious to the weight of what was happening on its banks. Then Cal nodded once, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "The boys need to come inside for lunch," he said roughly. "We are all getting too much sun." It was not a declaration of anything. It was not permission or acceptance or welcome, but it was something, a door cracking open instead of slamming shut. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Clara sat on the porch watching the stars emerge over the mountains. The night was cold, the kind of cold that reminded her how far she was from everything she had ever known. Cal appeared beside her, silent as always, and lowered himself onto the porch step. He did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on the northern cliff, barely visible in the darkness. "You are good with them," he said finally. "Better than I expected, better than I hoped. They are good boys. Just hurt. We are all hurt." His voice was flat, stating a fact. "The question is what we do with it. What do you do with it?" "I survive." Cal finally looked at her, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes that went deeper than physical tiredness. "That is all I have been doing for 3 years. Surviving, keeping the ranch together, keeping the boys alive, waiting for Victor to finally make his move. Tell me about Victor." Cal was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough. "Victor Crane owns the biggest ranch in the territory. He wants Stone Creek too. Has wanted it for years. After Lily died, he started pressuring me to sell. When I refused, he started making my life difficult. Suppliers who would not sell to me. Neighbors who stopped speaking to me. Men watching my property day and night. Why does he have so much power over you?" Cal's jaw tightened. Because he has something on me. Something that happened the night Lily died. What happened? Not yet. Cal stood abruptly. I am not ready to tell you that yet. Maybe not ever. He walked away, disappearing into the house, leaving Clara alone with the stars and her questions. She pulled out the letter she had found, the one signed with an L. He knows Cal. Victor knows everything. What did Victor know? What had happened on that cliff 3 years ago? Clara did not have answers, but she was starting to understand the shape of the mystery she had walked into. The next few days brought more progress with the boys. Eli spoke more frequently now, short sentences at first, then longer ones as his confidence grew. Noah remained silent, but his drawings were changing. Instead of the falling woman, he began to draw other things. The ranch, the mountains, Clara. One afternoon, while practicing his letters, Eli wrote something that made Clara's heart clench. I miss Mama. She picked up her own stick and wrote beneath it. I miss someone too. Eli looked at her with curious eyes. Who? My brother. His name was Tommy. What happened to him? He died. When he was younger than you? Were you sad? I'm still sad. Clara smiled gently. But being sad does not mean we cannot also be happy sometimes. We can miss people and still love new people. Our hearts are big enough for both. Eli considered this with the seriousness of a child who had learned too young that the world could take everything away. I think my heart is getting bigger, he said finally. I think so too. That evening, Jed pulled Clara aside while Cal was putting the boys to bed. I need to tell you something, he said, his weathered face grave, about Lily, about what really happened. Cal said he was not ready to talk about it. Cal may never be ready, but you need to know if you are going to stay here, if you are going to be part of this family. Clara waited, her heart beating faster. Lily was not happy here, Jed said slowly. She was a city woman who married a rancher thinking it would be romantic. When she realized how hard the life actually was, she started looking for a way out. Victor Crane? Jed nodded. He swept her off her feet, promised her everything Cal could not. Fine clothes, travel, a life of ease. She was having an affair. More than that. Jed's voice dropped lower. She was planning to leave. Take the boys, go with Victor. Cal found out. They argued. And then she died. Jed's face was haunted. I was not there. But I heard Cal crying afterward. A man does not cry like that unless his whole world has just shattered. Does he blame himself? Every single day. Jed put a hand on Clara's shoulder. But I have known Caleb Stone since he was a boy. He is hard, and he is cold, and he does not let anyone close. But he is not a killer. Whatever happened on that cliff, it was not murder. Clara thought about the letter, about Victor knowing everything, about the way Cal stood at the cliff every night staring down at ghosts. Thank you for telling me, she said. Just be careful. Jed's eyes were serious. Cal is starting to care about you. I can see it. The boys already love you. But if Victor finds out, he will use you against them. That is the kind of man he is. I can take care of myself. I believe you can, Miss Boston. But this is not Boston. Out here, the rules are different, and Victor Crane makes most of them. That night, Clara dreamed of falling. She stood on a cliff edge, wind tearing at her dress, and looked down into darkness that seemed to go on forever. Beside her stood a woman she had never seen. Dark hair, pale face, eyes full of secrets. Save them, the woman whispered. Save them because I could not. Then she fell, and Clara woke, gasping. The echo of a scream caught in her throat. Dawn was still an hour away, but she could not go back to sleep. She dressed quietly and went downstairs, thinking she would start breakfast early. Cal was already there, sitting at the kitchen table in the darkness, a glass of something amber in front of him. Could not sleep either, he said. It was not a question. Bad dreams. I have those every night. Cal took a sip of his drink. Lily falling. Me reaching for her. never quite catching her. Clara sat down across from him. Jed told me about her, about Victor. I figured he would. Cal did not seem angry. Jed has been wanting to tell someone for 3 years. It must have been killing him to keep quiet. He says you are not a murderer. He is right. Cal's voice was barely above a whisper. But I am also not innocent. I did something that night, something I have to live with forever. What did you do? Cal was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I hit her. When she told me about Victor, about leaving, about taking my boys, I hit her. Only time in my life I ever struck a woman. The confession hung in the air between them. And then she fell, Cal continued, stepped backward and lost her balance. I reached for her, but I was too late. I watched her fall, Clara. Watched the mother of my children disappear into the darkness below. And I have been falling ever since. Clara did not know what to say. She thought about her own guilt, her own secret shame. The weight of believing you had caused someone's death. You did not kill her, she said finally. Hitting her was wrong, but the fall was an accident. Victor does not see it that way. Cal's laugh was bitter. He was there, in the shadows, watching the whole thing. He has been blackmailing me ever since. Either I sell him the ranch, or he tells the sheriff I murdered my wife. Can he prove it? He is Victor Crane. He does not need proof. He needs influence, and he has plenty of that. So you have been trapped for 3 years. Cal finished his drink and set the glass down hard, just waiting, surviving, wondering when he would finally destroy what is left of my family. Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He flinched but did not pull away. Maybe you do not have to be trapped anymore, she said. Maybe there is another way. There is no other way. Victor is too powerful. Victor thinks he is powerful because no one has ever really fought him. But I have been underestimated my whole life, Mr. Stone. And I am still here. Cal looked at her, really looked, and she saw something kindle in his eyes. Not hope exactly, but the memory of what hope felt like. You are either very brave or very foolish, he said. Probably both. Clara squeezed his hand, but I am also stubborn, and I do not abandon people who need me. Not anymore. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn touching the mountains. A new day was coming, and with it, Clara suspected, a storm that would change everything. Victor Crane arrived at Stone Creek Ranch on a Tuesday afternoon when the autumn sun was bright and deceptive, making the world look warmer than it was. Clara heard the horses first. She was in the kitchen with the boys, practicing arithmetic with dried beans when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made all 3 of them freeze. Stay here, she told them. Do not come outside until I say. She grabbed the rifle that Cal kept by the kitchen door and stepped onto the porch, just as 5 riders crested the hill. Victor Crane rode at the front on a white horse that looked absurdly out of place against the dusty ranch landscape. He was dressed like an Eastern businessman, all fine wool and polished boots, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. Behind him rode 4 men who looked nothing like businessmen. Hard faces, gun belts, the kind of men who hurt people for money. Cal emerged from the barn, moving with deliberate calm toward the approaching riders. Jed appeared from somewhere, shotgun cradled casually in his arms. Caleb, Victor called out warmly. It has been too long. Cal said nothing. He stopped about 20 feet from where Victor had reined in his horse, his hand resting near his holster. Victor's eyes swept over the scene and landed on Clara. His smile widened. And who is this? He dismounted with practiced grace. Lily's replacement? She works here, Cal said flatly. Victor walked toward the porch, ignoring Cal completely. His eyes never left Clara, and she recognized that look. Burke had looked at her the same way, like she was merchandise to be assessed. Silas mentioned you were spirited, Victor said. Shame he could not complete our arrangement. The words hit Clara like cold water. Silas, her supposed fiancé. He had been working with Victor all along. I do not know any Silas, she said, keeping her voice level. Of course you do. Victor's smile did not waver. Silas Hartley. The man whose letters brought you all the way to Montana. He works for me, you see, has for years, bringing women west with promises of marriage and new beginnings. The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. All those beautiful letters, all those promises, none of it had been real. I give them employment, Victor continued. Women with no family, no prospects, nowhere to go. I provide them with opportunities they could not find elsewhere. You mean you sell them, Clara said coldly. Victor's expression flickered, the pleasant mask slipping for just a moment. I prefer to think of it as resource allocation, supply and demand, basic economics. She is not for sale, Cal said. He had moved closer without Clara noticing, placing himself between her and Victor. She works for me. That is the end of it. Victor's gaze shifted to Cal, and something dark moved behind his eyes. Everything in Copper Hollow can be mine, Caleb, you know that. Not everything. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Clara could feel the tension crackling between them like lightning waiting to strike. Then Victor smiled again, the pleasant mask sliding back into place. I just came to check on my investment, he said lightly, to make sure the Stone Creek Ranch is being maintained properly. After all, it will be mine soon enough. I am not selling. Victor's smile did not waver. Everyone sells eventually, Caleb. Everyone. He gestured to his men. Let us have a look around. Cal stepped forward. You are not going anywhere near that cliff. The cliff? Victor's eyes widened with mock innocence. Oh, you mean where dear Lily had her accident? No, no. I was thinking more along the lines of the cattle operation, the barn, the house. He paused meaningfully. The children's rooms. Stay away from my sons. Or what? Victor's voice dropped, all pretense of friendliness vanishing. You will hit me too, the way you hit Lily before she fell? The words landed like blows. Cal went pale, his hand dropping away from his gun. 3 years I have kept quiet, Victor continued softly. 3 years of protecting your secret. All I asked in return was the ranch. A fair trade, I think, your freedom for some land. And if I refuse, then the sheriff hears a very interesting story. Victor glanced at Clara. About a violent man who murdered his wife and is now keeping another woman against her will. It would be quite the scandal. I am not here against my will, Clara said. Victor looked at her with something like pity. Of course you are not, dear. Cal is very good at making people think they have choices. But you do not. You never did. You were supposed to belong to me from the moment you stepped off that train. I belong to no one. We will see. Victor turned back to Cal. 7 days, Caleb. That is how long you have to sign over the deed to Stone Creek. After that, I stop being patient. And if I sign, then I forget what I saw 3 years ago. You and your boys can leave, start over somewhere else. No one has to know anything. Cal's jaw tightened. What about Clara? Miss Brennan? Victor smiled again. She stays. As I said, she was supposed to be mine from the beginning. Consider her part of the settlement. No, Cal said. Excuse me? She is not part of any deal. She stays or goes as she chooses. Not you, not me, her. Victor's pleasant expression finally cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath. You are in no position to bargain, Caleb. I own this territory. I own the sheriff, the judge, half the businessmen in Copper Hollow. I can destroy you with a word. Then do it, Cal said quietly. But you will not get what you want. Because if you take my ranch and my freedom, I will have nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is very dangerous. The two men stared at each other. Neither moved. Neither blinked. Finally, Victor stepped back. 7 days, he repeated. Think carefully about what you want your children's future to look like. He mounted his white horse and rode away without looking back. His men followed, their hard eyes sweeping over the ranch one final time. When they were gone, the silence felt suffocating. Jed let out a breath he had been holding. Lord, have mercy. I thought he was going to shoot you where you stood. He wants the ranch more than he wants me dead, Cal said. Dead men cannot sign deeds. What are we going to do? Clara asked. Cal turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had not seen before. Not defeat, not fear, resolution. We are going to fight. That night, after the boys were asleep, Cal told Clara everything. They sat on the porch in the darkness, speaking in low voices. He told her about meeting Lily at a church social in Helena, about their whirlwind courtship, their marriage, the twins arriving less than a year later. He told her about Lily's unhappiness, how the isolation of ranch life wore on her like water wearing on stone, about Victor arriving in the territory 5 years ago, rich and charming and everything Cal was not. He told her about finding the letters, about confronting Lily at the northern cliff, the place where they had watched their first sunset together years before. She said she never loved me, Cal said, his voice hollow. Said she only married me for the ranch, for security. That Victor was the man she should have chosen from the beginning. That must have been devastating. It was. Cal stared at his hands. I lost control. Hit her. And she fell. But you did not push her. No. She stepped back and lost her footing. I reached for her, but... He stopped, unable to continue. Clara thought about what Jed had told her, about what she had seen in Cal's eyes every time he looked at his sons. You did not kill her, she said firmly. Hitting her was wrong, but the fall was an accident. The fall was in Mansu. Victor does not see it that way. He was hiding in the shadows, watching everything. He stepped out after she fell, looked down at her body, and smiled. Actually, smiled. Then he told me exactly what would happen if I did not cooperate. He wanted the ranch. He wanted Lily. But he could not have her anymore, so he settled for everything else she loved. The ranch. The boys. Even the way she died. He turned it into a weapon. What are we going to do? Cal was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. A year after Lily died, I tried to fight back. Gathered evidence about Victor's operation. Rallied some neighbors who were also tired of his control. What happened? The Henderson farmhouse burned down with the family inside. Tom Henderson, his wife, their 8-year-old daughter. Victor never admitted it, but everyone knew. So you stopped fighting. I had 2 boys who needed their father. I could not risk their lives on a war I would probably lose. Clara understood. She had made similar calculations in her own life, choosing survival over righteousness. But now, she asked, now I have 7 days to decide whether to keep surviving or start living. Cal looked at her with those haunted eyes, and she saw the question he was really asking. Whether she would stay, whether she would fight beside him, whether she was worth risking everything for. I came to Montana to start over, she said carefully, to leave behind the guilt and the shame and the feeling that I did not deserve to be happy. I found something here instead. Your boys, this ranch, you. I am not going to let Victor Crane take that away without a fight. You could leave, go somewhere safe. I could. But I am tired of running from hard things. Running is how I lost my brother. Running is how I ended up on a train platform in a wedding dress, believing lies from a man who wanted to sell me. Running has not saved me yet. Cal's hand found hers in the darkness. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. I cannot promise we will win, he said. I know. I cannot promise you will not get hurt. I know that too. Then why stay? Clara thought about the question. Thought about all the reasons she should walk away back to Boston or somewhere else where Victor Crane had never heard her name. Then she thought about Eli's voice saying, I think my heart is getting bigger. About Noah's hand gripping hers while he slept. About Cal standing alone on that cliff every night, trapped by guilt that was not entirely his to carry. "Because you are worth fighting for," she said. "All three of you." Cal did not respond, but his hand tightened on hers, and he did not let go until the first light of dawn touched the mountains. The next few days were tense. Victor's men watched the ranch from a distance, visible reminders of the deadline approaching. Jed kept his shotgun close at all times. Cal taught Clara where he kept all the weapons, how to load them, how to use them if necessary. On the fourth day, something changed. Clara was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard horses approaching. Her hand went immediately to the rifle by the door. But it was not Victor's men. It was a woman riding alone on a sturdy bay mare. The woman was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much hardship to be surprised by anything. She dismounted and approached the porch. "You must be Clara," she said. "I am Ruth Whitmore. I own the general store in town. Or I did until Victor Crane started making my life difficult." Clara set down the rifle. "Why are you here?" "Because Lily Stone was my friend." Ruth's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "And because I have information you need." They sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. Ruth told Clara things that made her blood run cold. Victor's operation was bigger than anyone knew. Dozens of women over the years lured west with promises of marriage, then sold to mining camps and saloons across the territory. Ruth's own daughter had been one of them. Sarah, 17 years old. Victor had sold her to a camp in Nevada 10 years ago. Ruth had not seen her since. "I have been waiting," Ruth said, tears in her eyes. "Waiting for someone brave enough to fight him. Waiting for proof that could bring him down." "What kind of proof?" "Lily kept records." Ruth pulled a wrapped package from her saddlebag. "She gave this to me before she died. Told me not to open it unless something happened to her. I have been too afraid to look." Clara took the package with trembling hands. "What do you think is in it?" "I think it is the truth. About Victor. About everything." Before Clara could respond, Cal walked in from the fields. He stopped when he saw Ruth, his expression guarded. "Mrs. Whitmore, what brings you to Stone Creek?" "I brought something that belonged to Lily." Ruth stood, suddenly nervous. "Something she wanted you to have." She left without saying anything else, leaving Clara holding a package that felt heavier than it should. That night, Cal and Clara opened it together. Inside were letters, a journal, and a photograph that made Cal's face go white. The letters were from Victor to Lily, threats disguised as love letters, promises and ultimatums wrapped in pretty words. The journal was worse. Lily had written everything. How Victor had seduced her, then threatened her. How he had forced her to spy on Cal, to report on the ranch operations, to slowly poison her own husband. "I put the powder in his coffee again today," one entry read. "My hands will not stop shaking. I cannot do this anymore, but Victor will not let me stop." Cal's hands were trembling so badly the pages rustled like leaves in wind. "She was trying to kill me," he said, his voice barely audible. "No." Clara took his hand. "She was being forced to try. There is a difference." She kept reading. The final entries told a different story than what Cal had believed for 3 years. "I have to tell Cal everything," Lily had written. "Even if he kills me himself, it is better than this. Victor will not let me live either way. At least if I tell Cal the truth, he will know. He will be able to protect the boys." "She was going to confess," Clara said slowly. "Not about an affair. About being forced to poison you. The night she died." Cal's eyes were wild. "She said Victor would not give her a choice. I thought she meant about leaving me, but she meant she had to either kill you or die herself, and she chose death." The truth settled over them like a physical weight. Lily had not been a villain. She had been a victim, trapped by Victor just as surely as Cal was trapped now. 3 years, Cal whispered. 3 years I thought I was a murderer. 3 years I hated her for betraying me. You did not know. I should have known. I should have seen what he was doing to her. Clara held him while he cried. For the first time since Lily died, he mourned not the wife he thought he knew, but the wife she had actually been. Trapped, terrified, choosing death over becoming a monster. When the tears stopped, something had changed in Cal's eyes. The guilt was still there, but it was different now, tempered by understanding. Victor killed her, he said. Not me. Victor, yes. Then he needs to pay. Clara pulled out the journal, the letters, the photograph of Victor with his arm around Lily, possessive and threatening. This is proof, she said, proof of everything, his operation, his threats, his manipulation. It is not enough to bring him down, maybe not, but it is enough to fight back. Cal looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, he smiled. Then, let us fight. The 5th day of Victor's deadline dawned gray and cold, clouds hanging low over the mountains like a warning. Clara woke early, as she had every day since arriving at Stone Creek, but this morning felt different. Today, they would make their move. Cal had spent the night planning with Jed, mapping out Victor's weaknesses, identifying potential allies in town who might be willing to stand against him. Ruth Whitmore had promised to speak with the few honest businessmen who remained to test the waters for support. Clara's job was different. She was to take Lily's journal and letters to the U.S. Marshal's office in Helena, a full day's ride from Copper Hollow. It was the only authority that might be able to challenge Victor's local power. But first, there was something Cal needed to do. I have to tell you the rest, he said over breakfast while the boys were still sleeping. Everything about that night. You do not have to. Yes, I do. Cal's jaw was set. If we are going to fight together, you need to know exactly who I am. They sat on the porch in the gray dawn light, and Cal told her the story she had only heard pieces of before. I found the letters on a Tuesday, he began, hidden in Lily's sewing box. I recognized Victor's handwriting immediately. We had done business together before he decided he wanted my ranch. What did the letters say? What I thought at the time. Love letters. Plans to run away together. Evidence of an affair that had been going on for at least a year. And now? Now I understand they were instructions. Times and doses for the poison. Threats about what would happen if she stopped cooperating. Victor was very thorough. Cal stared at the mountains, his eyes distant. I confronted her at the cliff that night, the place where we used to watch sunsets when we were courting. I thought it would be poetic, I suppose, ending things where they began. What happened, she cried, begged me to understand. Said she had no choice, that Victor would kill all of us if she did not do what he said. I thought she was lying, thought she was making excuses for her affair. But she was telling the truth. Yes. Cal's voice cracked. She was telling me exactly what was happening, and I was too angry to hear it. I called her a liar, called her worse things than that, and then I hit her. Just once. Just once. Cal looked at his hands like they belonged to a stranger. Open palm, across the face. The same way my father used to hit my mother when I was a boy. I swore I would never be like him. Swore I would never raise a hand to a woman. And in one moment of rage, I became exactly what I hated. Clara said nothing. She waited. She stepped backward, Cal continued, lost her footing on the loose rock. I reached for her, grabbed at her dress. But it tore and she fell. I watched her fall, heard her scream. It only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like hours. And Victor? Victor stepped out of the shadows. He had been there the whole time, watching, waiting. Cal's expression hardened. He looked down at Lily's body and smiled. Actually smiled. Then he told me what was going to happen. Either I cooperated or he told the sheriff I murdered my wife. That is when the blackmail started. Yes. 3 years of it. 3 years of him draining away everything Lily and I built together. 3 years of guilt so heavy I could barely breathe. But now you know the truth. Now I know the truth. Cal finally looked at Clara. Lily was not a villain. She was a victim. Just like me. Just like you. Victor is the villain. Victor is the monster. And I am done letting him win. The boys came downstairs then, drawn by the smell of breakfast. Eli was chattering about a dream he had, words flowing more easily every day. Noah was still silent, but his eyes were bright, and he carried a drawing he had made. He showed it to Clara. It was the family. Cal and the boys and Clara standing in front of the ranch house. Above them, a woman floated in the sky with wings. That is Mama, Eli explained. Noah says she is an angel now. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. That is beautiful, Noah. Noah smiled. It was small and tentative, but it was real. Cal watched the exchange with something like wonder on his face. His sons were healing. Slowly, painfully, but truly healing. We cannot leave, Clara said quietly to Cal. Whatever happens with Victor, we cannot take this away from them. I know. So we fight. We fight. That afternoon, Ruth Whitmore arrived with news. Victor knows something is happening, she said, her face pale. He has called in reinforcements. There are men watching all the roads out of town. You will not make it to Helena without being stopped. Cal swore under his breath. He is going to try to intercept the evidence. We need another plan. What if we do not run? Clara said slowly. What if we force his hand instead? What do you mean? Victor has been patient because he thinks he has time. He thinks we will eventually surrender. But what if we do not? What if we make him act before he is ready? That is dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. But Victor is not used to being challenged. He is used to people bowing down. What happens when someone stands up? Cal considered this. You think he will make a mistake. I think he will get angry. And angry men do stupid things. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Ruth would spread word that Cal was refusing to sell, that he had evidence of Victor's crimes, that he was going to fight. It was a calculated risk. Victor might respond by backing down, or he might respond by trying to destroy them before they could destroy him. Either way, the stalemate would end. That night, Clara could not sleep. She sat by her window, watching the darkness outside, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. A soft knock made her turn. Cal stood in her doorway, looking as sleepless as she felt. May I come in? She nodded. He crossed the room and stood by the window beside her. I wanted to thank you, he said, for staying, for fighting, for believing me. You never gave me a reason not to believe you. Most people would not see it that way. Most people would have run the moment they found out about Lily. Clara thought about that, about what she had learned in the past weeks, about the man who stood before her now, haunted and broken, and trying so hard to protect the people he loved. I have run from enough things in my life, she said. From my parents after Tommy died. From Boston when the scandal broke. From everything that ever hurt me. Running does not help. It just moves the pain somewhere else. What does help? Facing it. Clara turned to look at him directly, saying the hard truths out loud. Forgiving yourself for not being perfect. I do not know if I can forgive myself. Then let me help. Cal looked at her with something raw in his eyes, something vulnerable. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle as a whisper. You are the first person in 3 years who has made me feel like I might be worth saving, he said. Clara's heart was pounding. You are worth saving, Caleb Stone. You always were. He kissed her then, not desperate, not passionate, but soft. A question more than a statement. She answered by kissing him back. They stood together in the moonlight, two broken people finding something whole in each other. Outside, the darkness waited, full of threats and dangers they could not yet see. But in that moment, none of it mattered. There was only this: two people choosing each other, two people refusing to let the world win. When they finally pulled apart, Cal's eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I am glad you came to Montana. I am glad you stayed. So am I." He left her room a few minutes later, propriety still mattering even in the midst of chaos. Clara returned to her window and watched the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow they would face Victor and whatever storm he brought with him. But tonight, for just a few hours, there was peace. The 6th day of Victor's deadline brought fire. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of screaming horses. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, grabbing her robe and running for the door. Outside, the barn was ablaze. Orange flames licked at the night sky, casting dancing shadows across the ranch. Cal and Jed were already there, fighting to get the horses out, their faces lit by the hellish glow. "Get the boys," Cal shouted when he saw her. "Get them somewhere safe." Clara ran back inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The boys were awake, huddled together in their bed, terrified. "Come with me," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We need to go outside, away from the fire." She gathered them in her arms and carried them down to the cellar, the safest place on the ranch. The walls were thick stone, built to withstand anything Montana could throw at it. "Stay here," she told them. "Do not come out until your father or I come to get you." "Miss Clara," Eli whimpered, "what is happening? Some bad men are trying to scare us, but we are not going to let them." She left them there and ran back outside. The fire had spread. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky like grasping hands. 2 horses lay dead in the yard, shot before they could escape. Cal was standing near the well pump, watching the destruction with cold eyes. Jed was beside him, shotgun ready, scanning the darkness for threats. "Victor?" Clara asked. "His men." Cal did not look away from the fire. "Testing our defenses, seeing how we respond. This is a warning." "Yes." "Are you going to heed it?" Cal finally turned to look at her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes burning brighter than the flames behind him. "I am going to end it." The next morning, despite the exhaustion and the loss of the barn, Cal rode into Copper Hollow. He walked into the Golden Spur Saloon, where Victor was holding court, and called him out in front of everyone. Clara heard the story later from Ruth, who had been there. Cal walked right up to Victor's table, she said, her voice shaking with mixed fear and admiration. He put Lily's journal down in front of him and said, "Everyone in this room needs to know who they are working for." Then he read passages out loud. About the trafficking, the blackmail, the threats. What did Victor do? At first he laughed. Said Cal was desperate and making up lies. But some of the men at the table started looking at each other, started wondering. The seed of doubt was planted. Yes, Victor has power because people believe he is untouchable. Cal just showed them he is not. Clara felt a flicker of hope. Was that the moment that would change everything? The moment that would bring Victor down? But hope was dangerous, and Victor Crane did not take challenges lying down. That night, Cal returned to Stone Creek with news. "Victor has called in more men," he said grimly. "He's going to make his move tomorrow." The 7th day. How many men? 8, maybe 10. More than we can fight. What are we going to do? We are going to be ready, and we are going to pray that the seed I planted today grows faster than Victor's anger. Clara looked at Cal, at the determination in his eyes, at the exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. "I am scared," she admitted. "So am I. But we are still going to fight. We are still going to fight." That night, Clara went to the boys and told them a story. Not a fairy tale, but the truth about their mother. About how she had loved them so much she died to protect them. About how their father was fighting to keep them safe, just like Lily had. Eli listened with wide eyes. Noah listened in his usual silence. But when Clara finished, Noah did something unexpected. He wrote on his tablet, "Mama was brave." "Yes," Clara said, tears in her eyes. "She was very brave. We will be brave, too." Clara hugged them both, these broken boys who were mending her as much as she was mending them. Tomorrow the storm would come. Tomorrow everything would be decided. But tonight, there was love. There was family. There was something worth fighting for. That would have to be enough. The seventh day dawned clear and cold, the sky a merciless blue that seemed to mock the violence about to unfold. Clara had been awake since before sunrise, making breakfast for everyone, even though no one felt like eating. It was something to do with her hands, something to fill the terrible waiting. Cal sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his pistol with methodical precision. Jed was outside, keeping watch. The boys were in their room under strict orders to stay there until told otherwise. "When do you think they will come?" Clara asked. "Midday. Victor likes an audience. He will want the whole town to see him take what he believes is his. What is our plan? Ruth has been talking to people. There are some who are tired of Victor's control. Whether they are brave enough to stand against him, I do not know. And if they are not, then we make our stand alone." Clara set down the pot she was holding and crossed to where Cal sat. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If things go bad, if it looks like Victor is going to win, get the boys out. Do not worry about me. Just get them somewhere safe." Cal looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I am not leaving you behind. The boys need their father. They need you too." Cal's voice was rough. "They love you, Clara. And so do I." The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt her heart skip. Cal set down his pistol and stood, taking her hands in his. "I know this is not the time. I know there are 100 reasons why I should not say this now. But if today is the last day I have, I want you to know. I love you. Whatever happens, I love you." Clara felt tears well in her eyes. "I love you too." He kissed her then, soft and tender and full of everything neither of them could say. When they pulled apart, there was a new resolve in his eyes. "Then we fight for each other," he said, "all of us, together." The sound of horses reached them around noon. Clara was in the kitchen with the boys, keeping them calm, when Jed burst through the door. "They are here. 12 men on horseback. Victor is with them." Cal grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside." "I can fight," Clara said. "I know you can. But the boys need someone to protect them if we fail. That is you." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him, but she knew he was right. Eli and Noah were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "I will keep them safe," she promised. Cal looked at his sons with an expression of pure love. "Boys, whatever happens, know that I am proud of you. Both of you." Then he was gone, out the door to face whatever waited in the yard. Clara moved to the window, keeping the boys behind her. She could see Cal and Jed standing side by side, 2 men against a small army. Victor sat on his white horse at the head of the group, resplendent in his fine clothes, looking every inch the gentleman he pretended to be. "Caleb," Victor called out, "it has been 7 days. Have you made your decision?" "I have." "And?" Cal's voice carried clearly across the yard. "Go to hell." Victor's pleasant expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. "I was hoping you would say that." He raised his hand. "Burn it all." The men dismounted and started moving toward the buildings, torches in hand. But before they could light them, something unexpected happened. More riders appeared on the ridge, dozens of them, men and women from town. Some Clara recognized and some she did not. Ruth Whitmore was at the front, sitting straight in her saddle. "That is far enough, Victor," Ruth called out. "You are under citizen's arrest." Victor laughed. "Citizen's arrest? On what authority?" "On the authority of the people you have terrorized for too long." Ruth pulled out a badge that glinted in the sunlight. "And on the authority of Sheriff Marcus Cole of Helena, who deputized every single one of us this morning." "Sheriff Cole?" Victor's smile wavered. "He has no jurisdiction here. He does when federal crimes are involved." A new voice and a new rider appeared. Sheriff Cole himself, a weathered man with a star on his chest and cold justice in his eyes. human trafficking, kidnapping across state lines, murder. These are not local matters, Crane. They are territorial matters. And I have been waiting for evidence to take you down for 5 years. You have no evidence. We have this. Sheriff Cole held up Lily's journal. Given to us by Mrs. Whitmore. Detailed accounts of your entire operation. Names, dates, transactions. Enough to send you to prison for the rest of your life. Victor's face went pale for the first time since Clara had met him. That journal is a forgery. Is it? Sheriff Cole dismounted and walked toward Victor. Then you will not mind if we bring in some of the women mentioned in it, the ones who survived your hospitality. I imagine they will have plenty to say about what is real and what is forged. Victor's eyes darted around, looking for escape, looking for allies. But his men were backing away, wanting no part of what was about to happen. This is not over, Victor said, his cultured voice cracking. Yes, it is. Victor went for his gun. It was a desperate move, born of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. But Cal was faster. The shot echoed across the valley. Victor's pistol fell from nerveless fingers as he clutched his shoulder, blood spreading across his fine wool coat. He fell from his horse, landing hard in the dirt, and for the first time, looked like exactly what he was. A small, cruel man whose power had just evaporated. Victor Crane, Sheriff Cole said, standing over him. You are under arrest. You will be transported to the territorial prison in Deer Lodge to await trial. Clara watched from the window as they dragged Victor to his feet, as his men scattered to avoid arrest, as the people of Copper Hollow finally found the courage they had been hiding for years. It was over. Incredibly. Impossibly. It was over. Miss Clara. She turned. Eli was standing behind her, his face still pale, but his eyes bright. Is Papa okay? Clara looked back out the window. Cal was striding toward the house, his rifle in one hand, his face split by the biggest smile she had ever seen. Yes, sweetheart, she gathered both boys into her arms. Your Papa is just fine. We all are. The aftermath was chaos, but the good kind. Victor's men either fled or surrendered. The evidence in Lily's journal proved to be exactly as damning as Sheriff Cole had hoped. Names and dates and transactions, all meticulously recorded by a woman who knew she might not survive to testify herself. Victor was transported to Deer Lodge the next morning, his fine clothes dirty and torn, his arrogant smile gone. He would spend the rest of his life in the territorial prison, surrounded by the kind of hard men he had always used, but never truly understood. His empire crumbled quickly. Without his protection, Burke and the others scattered. The Golden Spur Saloon was shut down, its women freed and given the choice to stay or go. Most chose to go, eager to put Montana behind them. But some stayed, and some came back. Ruth Whitmore received a letter 3 weeks after Victor's arrest. It was from her daughter, Sarah, the girl Victor had sold to a mining camp 10 years before. She was alive, working in a boarding house in Nevada. She had seen the news about Victor's arrest and finally felt safe enough to write home. Ruth left for Nevada the same day. Clara saw her off at the train station, both of them crying. Thank you, Ruth said, gripping Clara's hands, for being brave enough to fight. You fought too. We all did. But you started it. You and Cal. You showed us it was possible. The train whistle blew. Ruth hugged Clara one last time and climbed aboard, going to reunite with a daughter she had thought lost forever. At Stone Creek Ranch, the healing continued. Cal hired new hands to replace the workers who had been scared off by Victor over the years. The barn was rebuilt, bigger and stronger than before. The ranch began to prosper again, free from the shadow that had hung over it for so long. The boys flourished most of all. Eli talked constantly now, making up for 3 years of silence. He asked questions about everything, wanted to know how the world worked, why the sky was blue, and why horses needed shoes, and why his mama had to die. That last question came on a quiet evening, a month after Victor's arrest. Clara and Cal and the boys were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Miss Clara," Eli said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did Mama have to die?" Clara looked at Cal. He nodded slightly. "Your Mama was caught in a very hard situation," Clara said carefully. "A bad man was making her do things she did not want to do. She felt like she had no choice. But she loved you boys so much. She wanted to protect you. That is what she was trying to do in her own way." "Is she an angel now?" Clara thought about Lily, about the journal she had kept, the impossible choices she had faced, the death she had chosen rather than become a monster. "I think so," she said. I think she's watching over you right now." Noah had been silent through this exchange, as he usually was. But then he did something unexpected. He spoke. "Mama loved us." It was only 3 words, barely above a whisper. But they were the first words Noah had spoken in 3 years. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. Cal made a choked sound beside her. "Yes, baby." Clara gathered Noah into her arms. "Your mama loved you so much." Noah buried his face in her shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger. "I love you too, Miss Clara. I love you too, sweetheart. I love all of you." Cal wrapped his arms around all 3 of them, his family, the family that had been broken and was finally putting itself back together. They sat like that until the sun went down and the stars came out, holding each other against the darkness that had tried so hard to tear them apart. The darkness had lost. 2 months after Victor's arrest, Cal asked Clara to marry him. It was not a fancy proposal. No ring, no kneeling, no pretty words rehearsed beforehand. They were standing at the northern cliff, the place where Lily had died, watching the sunset that Cal had watched alone for 3 years. "I used to hate this place," Cal said quietly. "Every time I came here, I felt like I was falling too, like I would never stop falling. And now? Now I think Lily would want us to be happy here, to make new memories instead of just mourning old ones." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Clara Brennan, you came to Montana to marry a stranger. You stayed to heal 2 broken boys. Somewhere along the way, you healed me too. I do not have much to offer except a ranch and a family and a whole lot of hard work. But I love you, and I am asking you to stay, not as a teacher, not as an employee, as my wife." Clara looked at this man who had been through so much, who had lost everything and fought his way back, who had shown her that it was possible to survive the worst and still find joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, to all of it." Cal's smile was like the sun coming out after a storm. He kissed her there on the cliff where so much had been lost, where so much was being found again. Behind them they heard cheering. The boys had followed them, hiding behind a boulder, waiting to see what would happen. "Does this mean Miss Clara is going to be our mama?" Eli shouted. Clara laughed through her tears. "If you will have me." Noah ran forward and threw his arms around her. "We will have you. We already decided." "When did you decide?" "That first night," Eli said, grinning, "when you sang to Noah and made him stop crying. We decided then that we wanted to keep you forever." Cal gathered all of them into his arms. "Then it is settled. We are a family." They walked back to the ranch house together, the 4 of them, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them the cliff stood silent and empty, no longer a place of death, just another part of the landscape of their lives. The past was the past. The future was waiting, and they would face it together. The wedding was planned for spring, when the snow melted and the wildflowers bloomed across the mountain meadows. But the winter months between were not idle. There was work to do, a ranch to rebuild, a family to strengthen, and loose ends that needed tying. 3 months after Victor's arrest, Clara received a letter that made her hands shake. It was from Boston, from a lawyer representing her late father's estate. "The debts have been settled," the letter read. "Through an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative, all outstanding obligations have been paid. Your name has been cleared. You are free to return to Boston society if you wish." Clara read the letter 3 times, trying to understand what it meant. For 5 years she had been running from her father's debts, from the scandal that had destroyed her family's reputation. Now suddenly that burden was lifted. "What is it?" Cal asked, seeing her expression. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his face carefully neutral. "You could go back," he said when he finished. "Start over. The fancy life you were raised for. Is that what you want? I want you to be happy. If that means Boston, then—" Clara took the letter from his hands and walked to the fireplace. She fed it to the flames without hesitation. "I was raised for fancy dinners and society gossip," she said, watching the paper curl and blacken. "But that is not who I am anymore. I am a ranch wife, a mother, a woman who knows how to shoot a rifle and birth a calf and teach 2 stubborn boys their multiplication tables." Cal's arms came around her from behind. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything. Boston is my past. Stone Creek is my future, our future." He held her tighter, and she felt his breath warm against her hair. "I do not deserve you," he murmured. "Let me be the judge of that." The winter was hard, but not unbearable. Snow piled high around the ranch, isolating them from town for weeks at a time. But Clara did not mind the isolation. It gave her time with the boys, time with Cal, time to build the life she had always wanted without knowing it. Eli's reading improved dramatically. He devoured every book Clara could find, hungry for knowledge about a world beyond the mountains. Noah's progress was slower, but just as meaningful. He spoke more each day, short sentences at first, then longer ones. By February, he was having actual conversations, his voice still soft but growing stronger. One evening, during a particularly fierce blizzard, the 4 of them sat around the fire playing cards. Eli was winning as usual, his quick mind giving him an advantage none of them could match. "This is not fair," Jed complained from his chair in the corner. "The boys a cheat." "I am not cheating," Eli protested. "I am just paying attention." "To what?" "To everything." Eli shrugged. "People show their cards in all sorts of ways. The way they hold them, the way they breathe, their eyes." Clara and Cal exchanged glances. Their son was entirely too perceptive for a 7-year-old. "Where did you learn that?" Clara asked. "Noah taught me." Noah looked up from his own cards, a small smile playing at his lips. "It is true," he said quietly. "I watch people. It is how I talk to everyone when I could not use words." Clara felt her heart clench. This child who had retreated so far into silence that everyone thought he might never return. This child who had found his own way to communicate with the world, even when the world refused to listen. "You are both remarkable," she said. "You know that, right?" Both boys shrugged with identical gestures. "We are just us," Eli said. "Yes, you are." As winter began to release its grip, a visitor arrived at Stone Creek. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the horse. Cal had gone to check on the cattle in the far pasture, taking both boys with him to teach them the finer points of ranching. She was alone. She grabbed the rifle by the door before going out to meet the stranger. Old habits died hard. The man on horseback was weathered and worn, his clothes suggesting weeks of hard travel. He looked at Clara with eyes that held too much sorrow. "I'm looking for Caleb Stone," he said. "My name is Thomas Henderson." Henderson. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. The family Victor had killed when Cal tried to fight back. "Tom Henderson is dead," she said carefully. "Victor Crane murdered him and his family 5 years ago." "I know," the man said. "Tom was my brother." Clara lowered the rifle slightly. "What do you want?" "To talk." The man dismounted slowly. holding his hands where she could see them. I have been searching for someone willing to testify against Victor Crane for years. When I heard about his arrest, I came as fast as I could. Why? Because my niece did not die in that fire. The man's voice cracked. She escaped. Burned badly, but alive. She has been hiding ever since, terrified Victor would find her. I want to bring her home, but first I need to know that he will never hurt anyone again. Clara felt the world shift beneath her feet. Your niece survived. Emma. She was 8 years old. She crawled out through a window while her parents burned. The last 5 years have destroyed her, but she is still alive. Does Cal know? No one knows. She made me promise to keep her hidden until Victor was dead or imprisoned forever. Clara thought about what this meant. Another survivor. Another witness. Another person whose life had been shattered by Victor Crane. Cal will want to talk to you, she said finally. He carries a lot of guilt about what happened to your family. Guilt? He blames himself for starting the fight against Victor, for making your brother a target. Thomas Henderson was quiet for a long moment. My brother knew the risks, he said finally. He chose to fight anyway, because he believed it was right. Caleb Stone did not kill my family. Victor Crane did. If Cal has been carrying that guilt, it is time he set it down. Cal returned an hour later with the boys. Clara saw his face go pale when he recognized the Henderson family resemblance in Thomas's features. But instead of the confrontation Clara expected, something different happened. Thomas Henderson walked up to Cal, looked him in the eye, and extended his hand. My brother believed in you, Thomas said. He believed you were the man who could bring Victor down. It took longer than either of you expected, but you did it. That is all that matters. Cal stood frozen for a moment. Then, slowly, he took the offered hand. I am sorry, he said, his voice rough. I am so sorry I could not stop it. Stop blaming yourself for Victor's sins. Thomas's grip tightened on Cal's hand. You fought. You survived. You won. Tom would be proud. Clara watched the two men, watched years of guilt begin to lift from Cal's shoulders. Another wound healing, another step toward wholeness. Thomas stayed for dinner, telling stories about his brother, about the Tom Henderson who had been brave enough to stand up when everyone else bowed down. The boys listened with wide eyes, learning about heroes who did not wear capes or carry magic swords, real heroes who did the right thing even when it cost them everything. After dinner, Thomas gave them one more gift. The trial is scheduled for April, he said. The territorial court wants witnesses. I would like Emma to testify, if she is strong enough. But she will need support. People who understand what she has been through. She can stay with us, Clara said without hesitation, for as long as she needs. Cal nodded agreement. Stone Creek Ranch is a place for healing now. There is room for anyone who needs it. Thomas's eyes glistened. Thank you, both of you. You have given me hope I thought I had lost forever. He left the next morning, riding hard for Nevada, where Emma was hiding. He would bring her back for the trial, another survivor of Victor's cruelty, finding her way home. Spring came early that year. The snow melted in a rush, turning the creeks into torrents, and the meadows into seas of mud. But the wildflowers followed quickly, carpeting the mountainsides in purple and yellow and white. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in April, 2 weeks before Victor's trial. Clara stood in her room looking at the dress she had made for the occasion. Simple white cotton, nothing like the elaborate silk she had worn when she arrived in Montana. That dress was gone now, burned in the fire that destroyed the barn. She did not miss it. Miss Clara? Eli's voice came from the doorway. Can we come in? Of course. Both boys appeared, dressed in their Sunday best, looking uncomfortable but determined. We have something for you, Noah said. He was speaking in full sentences now, his voice growing stronger every day. Eli stepped forward and handed her a small box. We found it in Mama's things, he said. Jed helped us clean it up. We want you to have it. Clara opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple gold locket on a delicate chain. She opened it and found 2 tiny photographs. Eli and Noah as babies, their faces round and innocent. "It was Mama's," Eli explained. "She wore it every day." "Are you sure?" Clara asked, her voice thick with emotion. Noah nodded solemnly. "You are our Mama now. You should have it." Clara gathered both boys into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "I will treasure it forever," she whispered. "Thank you." The wedding was simple and beautiful. They held it on the northern cliff, the place where so much pain had happened, transformed now into something new. Ruth Whitmore had returned from Nevada with her daughter Sarah, both of them tearful and grateful. Thomas Henderson was there with Emma, a scarred and shy girl who was slowly emerging from the shadows of her past. Jed stood as Cal's witness, his weathered face cracked into the biggest smile anyone had ever seen. The boys stood beside Clara, their small hands clasped in hers. Sheriff Cole officiated, having ridden out from Helena specifically for the occasion. "Do you, Caleb Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" he asked. "I do," Cal said, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "And do you, Clara Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Cal kissed her, and the small crowd cheered. The boys threw wildflowers they had gathered that morning. Somewhere, a bird sang. Clara looked out over the valley that had become her home, at the mountains that had witnessed her transformation from a desperate woman in a ruined wedding dress to a wife, a mother, a member of a community that had learned to stand together. It was not the life she had imagined when she boarded that train in Boston. It was better. That night, after the celebration had ended and the guests had gone home, Clara and Cal sat on the porch watching the stars. The boys were asleep inside, exhausted from the excitement. The ranch was quiet, peaceful in a way it had not been for years. "Mrs. Stone," Cal said, testing out the name. "Mr. Stone," Clara replied, smiling. "I like the sound of that. So do I." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft whicker of horses in the rebuilt barn. "I keep waiting to wake up," Cal admitted, "to discover this is all a dream." "It is not a dream." Clara took his hand. "It is real. We are real. How did I get so lucky?" "You were not lucky. You were brave. You fought for your sons, for your home, for everything that mattered. You earned this happiness." Cal brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "We earned it," he corrected. "Together. Together." They went inside eventually, to the room that was now theirs, to the life that was now theirs, to a future that finally looked bright. Outside, the northern cliff stood silent in the starlight. No longer a place of death, now a place of new beginnings. Lily's ghost, if it lingered at all, seemed at peace. Victor Crane's trial began on a Monday morning in April, 2 weeks after Clara and Cal's wedding. The territorial courtroom in Helena was packed. Ranchers and miners and businessmen crowded the benches, all wanting to see the man who had controlled their territory for years finally brought to justice. Clara sat in the front row with Cal and the boys. Ruth Whitmore was there with Sarah. Thomas Henderson with Emma, the scarred survivor whose testimony would be the most damning of all. The charges were read aloud. Human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, blackmail, arson resulting in death. The list went on and on, a catalog of cruelty that made even hardened frontier men pale. Victor sat at the defendant's table in prison clothes, his fine manners stripped away, his cultured voice silenced. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The monster revealed to be just a man. The prosecution called witness after witness. Women who had been trafficked through his operation and survived. Men who had paid bribes to keep their families safe. Business owners who had been extorted for years. Then Ruth took the stand. She told the story of her daughter Sarah, how Victor's men had taken her from the streets of Copper Hollow, how she had been sold to a mining camp in Nevada, How 10 years of searching had finally led to reunion. "And I am one of the lucky ones," Ruth said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "My daughter survived. Dozens of others were not so fortunate." Victor's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggested she was lying for attention, suggested she had no proof. Ruth produced letters, receipts, the very records Victor had kept of his transactions, seized from his office after his arrest. The lawyer sat down. Emma Henderson testified next. Her voice was barely above a whisper, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip the witness stand to steady herself. She told the story of the fire, how Victor's men had set it while her family slept, how she had woken to smoke and screaming, how she had crawled through a window while flames consumed everything she loved. She showed her scars, the burns that covered half her body, the price of Victor Crane's revenge against anyone who dared to oppose him. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom. Even some of the jurors were crying. Then it was Cal's turn. He walked to the witness stand with his head high, looking every inch the rancher he was. No fine clothes, no fancy words, just a man telling the truth. He told the story of Lily, how Victor had seduced her, forced her to spy on her own husband, tried to make her a murderer. He read passages from Lily's journal, her anguished words about the impossible choices Victor had forced upon her, her final entry, written the night she died. "I cannot kill my husband. I cannot live under Victor's control. There is only one choice left. God forgive me. Tell my boys I love them." Cal's voice broke on the last words. Clara watched him fight for composure, watched him win. "Lily Stone did not fall from that cliff," Cal said, his voice steady now. "She jumped, because Victor Crane left her no other option. He murdered my wife as surely as if he had pushed her himself. The defense had no response. There was no response to the truth laid bare. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Victor Crane was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in the territorial prison at Deer Lodge, the maximum allowed by law. As the guards led him away, Victor finally broke his silence. "This is not over, Stone," he snarled. "I have friends, connections. I will be out sooner than you think." Cal stood and looked at the man who had tormented his family for years. "No," he said quietly, "you will not. And even if you were, it would not matter. We are not afraid of you anymore." Victor's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The guards dragged him away, his curses echoing through the emptying courtroom. It was over, finally truly over. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. Clara stood with Cal and the boys, surrounded by friends and allies. Ruth and Sarah, Thomas and Emma. Jed, who had made the journey despite his age. Half the town of Copper Hollow, it seemed, had come to witness the end of Victor Crane's reign. "What happens now?" Eli asked. "Now we go home," Cal said, "and we live our lives. That is what happens now. Is the bad man going to stay in jail forever? For a very long time. Long enough that he will never hurt anyone we love ever again." "Good," Noah said firmly. "He was mean." "Yes, he was mean. And now, he is gone." Cal gathered his family close. Over their heads, he met Clara's eyes and smiled. "Let us go home." The ride back to Stone Creek took most of the day. The boys fell asleep in the wagon bed, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the trial. Clara sat beside Cal on the bench seat, watching the mountains grow closer. "I keep thinking about Lily," Cal said eventually. "About what she went through. What Victor put her through. She was braver than anyone knew." "Yes." Cal was quiet for a moment. "I spent 3 years hating her, hating myself, carrying guilt that was not mine to carry. All that wasted time." "It was not wasted," Clara said gently. "It made you who you are, made the boys who they are, made us possible." "You think so? I know so." Clara took his hand. "Everything we went through led us here, to this moment, to this family. I would not change any of it." Cal raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Mrs. Stone," he said. Mr. Stone, she replied. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the mountains rising around them, the future spreading out ahead. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Cal and Clara stood at the northern cliff one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the valley spread out in all its wild beauty. Stone Creek Ranch, their home. I want to do something, Cal said. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. His words. The last confession he had written to Lily, filled with guilt and grief and unanswered questions. For 3 years, he said, I came here to apologize, to beg for forgiveness I did not think I deserved, to punish myself for something that was not my fault. He looked at the paper, at the words he had written in the depths of despair. But now I understand. Lily does not need my apologies. She needs me to be happy. She needs me to raise our boys to be good men. She needs me to love again. He held the paper out over the cliff's edge. So I am letting go. All the guilt, all the blame, all the years of thinking I was a monster. I am letting it go. He opened his fingers. The wind caught the paper and carried it away, spiraling down into the darkness below. Goodbye, Lily, Cal whispered. I will take care of them. I promise. Clara slipped her hand into his. She knows, she said softly. Wherever she is, she knows. They stood together as the last light faded from the sky. Behind them, the ranch waited, warm and welcoming. The boys slept peacefully. A new life beckoned. The shadows of the past were finally gone. Only the future remained. 6 months after Victor Crane's trial, Stone Creek Ranch had transformed. The herd had doubled. The barn had been expanded. A new bunkhouse sheltered the ranch hands who had come to work for Cal, drawn by his reputation for fairness and his wife's legendary cooking. But the biggest change was in the people. Eli had started school in Copper Hollow, riding in with Cal twice a week to attend classes with other children his age. His quick mind had made him the top student within a month. He was still the quiet twin, the observer, but his silence was now by choice rather than necessity. Noah had bloomed in different ways. He spent hours drawing, his talent evident to anyone who saw his work. Clara had sent some of his pictures to a publisher in San Francisco, and they had written back, expressing interest in using his illustrations for children's books. My boy, a published artist, Cal said wonderingly when the letter arrived. He will be famous before he turns 10. He will be whatever he wants to be, Clara said. That is the important thing. He gets to choose now. As for Cal himself, the change was perhaps the most dramatic. The haunted look had left his eyes. The tension that had held his shoulders rigid for years had finally released. He smiled now, laughed, played with his sons without the shadow of guilt darkening every moment. Clara watched him sometimes, marveling at the transformation. This was the man Lily had married, she thought. Before Victor, before everything fell apart. This was who he was meant to be. And Clara? Clara had found something she had stopped believing existed. Home. Not just a place, though Stone Creek had become that, but belonging, purpose. A family that needed her and whom she needed in return. The guilt over Tommy would never fully disappear. But it had changed, softened, become something she could carry rather than something that crushed her. She had not killed her brother. She had been a child herself, distracted for a moment at exactly the wrong time. Tragedy, but not murder. Loss, but not fault. It had taken coming to Montana, losing everything, and fighting her way back to understand that. In September, Clara received another letter. This one was from Emma Henderson. The scarred girl had returned to Nevada with her uncle after the trial, but she had stayed in touch, writing regularly about her recovery, her progress, her slow emergence from the shadows of her past. This letter was different. I am coming back to Montana, Emma wrote. Uncle Thomas says the ranch is lonely without help, and I want to learn. Would you teach me? Not just reading and writing, but all of it. How to be brave. How to start over. How to be more than what happened to me. Clara read the letter aloud to Cal that evening. We could use help around here, Cal said thoughtfully. And the girl deserves a chance. She deserves more than a chance. She deserves a family. Then we will give her one. Emma arrived in October, just as the first snow dusted the mountaintops. She was 17 now, still scarred, still shy, still haunted by memories that would never fully fade. But she was also determined, fierce in a quiet way that reminded Clara of herself. The boys adopted her immediately. Eli took it upon himself to show her every corner of the ranch, explaining each task with the seriousness of a professor delivering a lecture. Noah drew her picture and presented it solemnly, a gift to welcome her home. "You are one of us now," Noah told her. "That is what Miss Clara says. Family is not about blood. It is about choice. And we choose you," Emma cried. Then she laughed. Then she cried again. Clara understood. She had felt the same way once, when these same boys had first chosen her. Winter came harsh and long that year. Snow piled high around the ranch, isolating them from the outside world for weeks at a time. But inside, there was warmth. There was laughter. There was love. Cal read aloud by the fire while Clara knitted, and Emma learned to mend clothes, and the boys played endless games of checkers. Jed told stories about the old days, about Cal's father and grandfather, about the generations of Stones who had worked this land. "We are part of something bigger," Clara realized one evening, watching her family gathered around the hearth. "Bigger than ourselves, bigger than our lifetimes. We are links in a chain that stretches back into the past and forward into the future." It was a humbling thought, and a comforting one. Spring came late, but beautiful. The wildflowers were more abundant than Clara had ever seen them, carpeting the meadows in waves of color. The boys spent every free moment exploring, bringing back treasures to show their parents. Interesting rocks, unusual feathers, a baby bird that had fallen from its nest, which Clara helped them nurse back to health before releasing it. One morning in May, Clara woke feeling strange. Not sick exactly, just different. She knew what it meant even before she confirmed it with the doctor in town. She told Cal that evening after the boys were in bed. They were sitting on the porch, as they did most nights, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. "I have something to tell you," she said. Cal looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I am more than all right." Clara took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Cal went absolutely still. "A baby," he repeated. "Yes, our baby. Our baby." His face transformed, joy and terror and wonder all mixed together. "Clara." He pulled her into his arms. "Clara." They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, as the future shifted and expanded and became something even more beautiful than they had imagined. "Are you happy?" Clara asked. "I do not have words for what I am," Cal said. "Happy does not come close." They told the boys the next morning. Eli's reaction was typically analytical. "Will it be a boy or a girl? We will not know until it arrives." "When will it arrive?" "Late autumn, probably. Around your birthday." "I hope it is a girl," Eli said thoughtfully. "We have enough boys around here." Noah's reaction was simpler and more direct. He hugged Clara's stomach and whispered something too soft to hear. "What did you say?" Clara asked. "Hello, baby," Noah repeated. "I am your brother. I will protect you," Clara cried. She seemed to be crying a lot lately, but they were good tears, happy tears, the tears of a woman who had been given far more than she ever expected to receive. The months passed in a blur of preparation. Cal built a cradle with his own hands, carved from wood he had cut and cured himself. Ruth Whitmore sent baby clothes from town, far more than any one infant could possibly need. Emma proved surprisingly adept at sewing, creating tiny blankets and caps with careful, precise stitches. As autumn approached and Clara's belly swelled, she found herself thinking often about her mother, about the mother she would become, about the legacy she would leave to this child who had not yet drawn breath. "I want them to know they are loved," she told Cal one night. "More than anything else, more than reading or writing or how to run a ranch. I want them to know bone deep that they are loved. They will know, Cal said. How could they not? Look at what you have given our sons. Look at how they have grown. This baby will be the most loved child in the entire territory. Clara smiled and leaned into his embrace. What do you think Lily would say? She asked. If she could see us now? Cal was quiet for a long moment. I think she would be grateful, he said finally. Grateful that her boys have a mother who loves them. Grateful that the man she married found happiness again. Grateful that something good came from all that pain. Do you still miss her? Sometimes. Cal's voice was honest. Not the way I used to. More like missing a chapter of a book you once read. Part of the story, but not the end of it. I am glad, Clara said. I am glad you can think of her without pain. That is because of you. Cal kissed the top of her head. You showed me that grief and happiness can exist side by side. That loving you does not mean I cannot also honor what she and I had. We are both lucky, Clara said. Yes, we are. The baby came on a November night during the first real snowstorm of the season. Clara had been feeling strange all day, restless and uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with her swollen belly. By evening, she knew what was happening. Cal rode through the blizzard to fetch the midwife from town, leaving Jed and Emma to watch over Clara and the boys. The hours that followed were long and hard, filled with pain and fear and the ancient struggle of bringing new life into the world. But when dawn broke and the storm finally cleared, Clara held her daughter in her arms. She is perfect, Clara whispered, looking at the tiny face, the rosebud mouth, the impossible smallness of each finger and toe. Cal knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, completely unashamed. She looks like you, he said. She looks like herself. Clara smiled. What should we call her? They had discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But now, looking at this new life, Clara knew. Lily, she said, after the woman who gave everything to protect her sons, after the mother your boys lost. Cal's breath caught. Are you sure? She deserves to be remembered with love, not pain. And this little girl will carry that name forward into a future Lily could not have imagined. Lily Stone, Cal said, testing the name. Lily Stone. The baby opened her eyes, dark like her father's, and looked up at her parents with the infinite wisdom of the newborn. Welcome to the family, little Lily, Cal whispered. You are going to be so loved. The boys were introduced to their sister that afternoon. Eli approached with his typical seriousness, studying the baby with intense concentration. She is very small, he observed. She will grow. What can she do? Right now, not much. Eat and sleep and cry. But she will learn, just like you did. Can I hold her? Clara carefully transferred the baby to Eli's arms, showing him how to support her head. He held his sister with the care of someone handling something precious beyond measure. Hello, Lily, he said softly. I am your brother Eli. I am going to teach you everything I know. Noah approached more hesitantly. He had been quiet all day, processing this change in his own way. But when Eli offered to let him hold the baby, Noah shook his head. Instead, he pulled out his sketchbook and began to draw. An hour later, he presented his work. It was the family, Cal and Clara, Eli and Noah, Emma, Jed, and in Clara's arms, a tiny figure wrapped in blankets. Above them all, watching with a gentle smile, was a woman with wings. Mama Lily, Noah said, pointing to the angel. She is watching over us. Over baby Lily, too. Clara hugged him fiercely, her heart too full for words. The winter passed in a haze of sleepless nights and small victories. First smile, first laugh, first time Lily slept through the night, a miracle that Clara celebrated with more enthusiasm than she had celebrated anything in her life. Spring came, and with it new growth. The ranch prospered. The boys grew taller, Little Lily began to crawl, getting into everything, filling the house with her baby chaos. Emma blossomed in ways no one had expected. She had started corresponding with a young man in town, a carpenter's apprentice who had lost his own family in a mining accident. They understood each other's scars. By summer, there was talk of courtship. Ruth Whitmore visited often, always bringing news from town and presents for the children. Her daughter Sarah had settled in Copper Hollow, working at the general store, slowly rebuilding a life stolen from her years ago. And Victor Crane? He rotted in his prison cell, forgotten by a territory that had moved on without him. Occasional news filtered through that he had lost weight, lost his mind, lost everything that had made him powerful. No one mourned. On a summer evening, a year after Lily's birth, Clara sat on the porch watching her family. Cal was teaching Eli to repair a fence, their voices carrying across the yard in a rhythm of instruction and response. Noah sat in the grass with his sketchbook, capturing the scene in careful lines. Little Lily toddled between them on unsteady legs, squealing with delight at her own accomplishment. Emma sat beside Clara, sewing something delicate. A wedding dress, perhaps, for the ceremony planned for autumn. "It is strange," Emma said quietly. "A year ago, I did not think I would ever feel safe again. Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else." "That is what home does," Clara said. "It finds you when you least expect it. Is that what happened to you?" Clara thought about the question, thought about the train station and the telegram, the saloon and Burke's grabbing hands, the desperate journey to Stone Creek, expecting nothing, finding everything. "I came to Montana to marry a stranger," she said. "I stayed because 2 boys needed me, and somewhere along the way I stopped running from my past and started building a future. That is a good story. It is, and it is not over yet." Cal looked up from his work and caught Clara's eye. He smiled, that full, unreserved smile that still made her heart skip after all these months. She smiled back. In the distance, the mountains rose against the evening sky, purple and majestic and eternal. The northern cliff was just visible, no longer a place of tragedy, just another part of the landscape of their lives. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and the loss and the fear, the choices she had made, some desperate, some brave, the people who had helped her along the way. She thought about Tommy, her brother, dead now for 6 years, about the guilt she had carried and finally released, about the forgiveness she had found, not from others, but from herself. She thought about Lily, the first Lily, who had loved her sons enough to die rather than hurt them, whose memory lived on in the baby now toddling across the yard. She thought about Cal, her husband, who had taught her that broken people could heal, that darkness could give way to light, that love, real love, was worth fighting for. And she thought about herself, Clara Brennan Stone, no longer the desperate woman in a ruined wedding dress, now a wife, a mother, a survivor. "Mama," little Lily called, reaching for her with chubby arms. "Mama up." Clara scooped up her daughter and held her close, breathing in that sweet baby smell that never got old. "I am here," she said. "I am always here." The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The family gathered for dinner, voices overlapping, laughter filling the house. Outside, the first stars appeared. The same stars that had witnessed so much pain and so much joy. The same stars that would watch over Stone Creek Ranch for generations to come. Clara looked around the table at the faces she loved. Her husband, her sons, her daughter, her family chosen and true. And she had come to Montana with nothing. She had found everything. And that, she thought, was how the best stories ended. Not with dramatic rescues or villains defeated, but with this. A family around a table, love that had been earned through struggle, a home that had been built from the ashes of heartbreak. This was the happy ending she had stopped believing in. This was home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.